Hello, podcast land. Welcome to Voice of the Parrot. I'm your host, Shasta Ray, and I am joined in the studio tonight by Zoltan, the podcast bird, Bug, the wonder budgie, and the giant dog. And as you can hear, I've got a lot of chatter and singing going in the background. Oh my gosh, they're getting really crazy. And they've been flapping around a little bit too, so we might have some drama tonight, folks. We might have a little bit of drama. Oh my gosh, how is everyone? This week has gotten away from me. I recorded and published last week on Thursday, and then my whole weekend got completely dismantled and restructured. My week has gotten dismantled and restructured, and I'm still not budgeting my time the way I was, so I guess we're on a once a week schedule right now. I don't know, question mark. Stick with me, folks. It's always an adventure. It's always an adventure. All right, so this week, the stigma continues, and we're going to just dig a little bit deeper into the whole concept that I discussed last week about the stigma surrounding birds and keeping birds as pets. Because recently I found out that there's a lot of people out there that really look down on anyone that keeps birds. There's a negative opinion, and we're going to go into a little bit on how that can easily happen and get away from you before you know it hits you. I think it can happen to the best of us without realizing it, right? But before we get into that, I would like to dedicate this particular episode to an acquaintance of mine named Matthew, who I just found out this week passed away 2 weeks ago. And he was very, very, very indirectly responsible for this podcast occurring. He actually was responsible indirectly. He never knew this, but he influenced me to get Zoltan, ultimately. So anyway, his name was Matthew, and he was somebody that I sought out as a guest on my other podcast. He was the most interesting and obscure individual I think I've ever met in my life, and we had a nice little acquaintanceship. We talked on the phone a handful of times. I'm not going to pretend like I knew him well, but he was one of those people that everyone liked instantly. He was a very deep thinker. His thought process was kind of out in left field. He was kind of quirky. He was a brilliant musician. And in some of our discussions and conversations, he had mentioned to me early in his adulthood, so probably I'm guessing late 80s, early 90s, he had a pet budgie, a bird, and that bird's name was Crazy Bird. And he had some really great stories to tell about Crazy Bird, and I think he'd had other budgies besides just that one. But at any rate, this fellow had a heart of gold. He loved animals. He was passionate about everything that he was passionate about. I'm not sure if he was still vegan in recent years, but he lived most of his adult life as a vegan. He was a very deeply emotional guy, and he was always doing a lot of self-searching, trying to find himself in various ways, and we had a lot to connect with and talk about. He was a fascinating individual. And then last but not least, I had just talked to him this past April, I think, and we had actually talked about Crazy Bird again. We'd had plans to have him record with me for my other podcast, and we had a great conversation about it. He actually gave me a piece of music to use in my other podcast, and yeah, it's just a shock when someone like that goes, and we just didn't have the time or ability to follow through with some of those aspirations that we had. In fact, I had actually put it out there that he should make a brief appearance on this podcast and talk a little bit about Crazy Bird, and he was deeply into that. He was really behind this project of Voice of the Parrot podcast. He was all about podcasting, and yeah, rest in peace, Matt. I am going to miss you, as will everybody who ever knew you. Amazing guy, fun guy. All right, so let's get into our topic this week. Like I said, last week we discussed the stigma the negative portrayal of bird keeping, of having pet birds, this sort of thing. And I kind of talked about it. Some people let the cleanliness factor get away from them, and it gives a bad impression. And it's always the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. So when it comes to keeping birds, a lot of people have experienced another person or seen something where it was just a turnoff on the cleanliness factor or how that bird was kept. Or maybe they got the impression that all birds carry disease. I had mentioned we've had a lot of talk in recent years, in particular in the news. You always hear about bird flu getting out of control. Some people think that all birds carry that and just are randomly going to make you catch it and get sick. People have perceptions, and if they don't know and they don't have experience, their imaginations fill in the gaps for them, right? That's just part of being human. So let's talk about how some of these situations come to be. I think when it comes to the hoarding situations that we sometimes hear about, it's very easy in some cases with some birds to, they breed very readily in captivity, and that can get away from us. So we don't do enough research, or we think that we have to let them breed, and we're not prepared for it, and then before you know it, you have a lot of birds. Another thing that comes into play is a lot of small birds in particular are very easy to get a hold of. It is very easy to go to a pet store, and buy a bird, where going to a dog shelter in particular, the background checks, almost to the degree of background checks, but they check your home, they check you, they check your income, how you live. It is hard in some cases to adopt a dog. When I had Microdog, and it was back when I lived in the Denver area, I was looking at adopting an elderly Chihuahua, and I gave him all sorts of pictures, lifestyle, this, that, and the other. And I dote on my dogs. They get walked at least once a day. And they were just like, no, we're not going to let you have this dog. We just don't think that you have the right yard to have a dog like this. It was weird. I'm like, but I have one like it. And I gave you the whole schedule. No. So anyway, my point is, sometimes with rescues, they will do very diligent research on a person to see if they feel they are worthy to own a bird. Some of the bird shelters are like that, but pet stores don't do that, right? So the budgies, canaries, finches, conures, cockatiels, you can get those at pet stores really easy. All you need is cash. They'll sell it to you. No problem. So birds are very easy to hoard. And they're small, so people shove them in small cages, and you can get a lot of them in your house probably pretty quickly. The problem is, I'm going to talk about people in America, because I don't know a whole lot about lifestyles and statistics of other countries, but we're going to talk about the 3 probably most common forms of lack of health with our mental and emotional well-being. I really don't want to say mental illness. I think that in and of itself has a stigma attached. So I don't want to make anyone feel bad. There's nothing to be ashamed about. And this affects at least, it's estimated, around 50% of Americans on some level or another, from the lightest end of the spectrum to the severe cases. And then that's just the cases that are known about. It's estimated it could be way higher than that for people who have never, sought out professional help or talked to anyone, anything like that. So, from what I can determine, and we're going to do a lot of generalization here. So we're not trying to get super detailed on the mental health statistics. It's more as an example to give you an idea of kind of the reality of things out there. So 3 of the most common forms of issues we're seeing in people when it comes to your mental health and your mental well-being, your emotional well-being, all that good stuff. We're going to talk about real briefly depression, anxiety, and then like attention deficit disorder. Now, I have mentioned quite a while back on this podcast, I've experienced all three of these. I've got a genetic condition that I inherited from my mother. I've actually got two variants of a genetic mutation that affects how my body absorbs vitamins, certain vitamins. I also don't put out certain types of chemicals in the brain that help you stay balanced. So once I found out very simple supplementation, it has helped me turn all this around and stay balanced. But I have to take these supplements every day. And one thing that the vitamin deficiency was doing was affecting my nerves and my nervous system. So that's what started causing the anxiety for me. Now, anxiety for other people can come from trauma. It can come from dietary stuff. It can come from other conditions. There's all sorts of stuff. But generally speaking, the result and how it affects us is all kind of the same. We get this anxiety condition going on. Same with depression. There's all different kinds of things that can cause depression. There's all different types of depression, why it happens, this and that. There's clinical, there's circumstances, grief, things of this nature. Lots of stuff. But it kind of all affects us the same way in the end. There's variances, but generally speaking. And then with the attention deficit disorder, you toss that in the mix. Oh my gosh. So when it comes to me, I had the anxiety because of the vitamin thing. I've had troubles with the depression because of hormone imbalances as well as this chemical that my brain wasn't putting out properly. And I'm feeling like $1 million these days. I feel normal. Oh my gosh. But then the third thing that I've experienced is that another side effect of all of this has been that my liver does not like to detox properly. It doesn't offset all those things it filters out. So I really don't ever touch alcohol. I kind of have a sweet tooth. That can be kind of a problem for me. And I don't always eat healthy. So we're bombarded with horrible, horrible stuff in our food these days. That contributes. It's hard on the liver as it is. And then if you've got a liver that just doesn't want to let go of some of those toxins, you end up with a very toxic body. And you get brain fog. And you get a form of like adult attention deficit disorder. And it affects you weirdly. So I've had all three of these in one form or another, sometimes all at once. And I cannot imagine what it's like for people that struggle with this hardcore, right? So if you've never experienced this, I'm going to try to give you a little tiny peek inside as to what we struggle with when it comes to just housekeeping. And of course, it affects all different kinds of areas of your life. It affects your personality different ways. There's all different struggles that you have with even just one of these areas. Oh my gosh. And then society these days puts all this stress on us, so it amplifies it, right? So we have all these things going against us, but I really think it's safe to say that the three most common areas of our mental health issues today are anxiety, depression, and attention issues or brain fog issues or anything that kind of goes in that general direction. So I printed some stuff up that I just poked around online. I tried to find some statistics on all this and the why on all of this. And then we'll get into how it affects us with the birds. So first off, when it comes to all of this, any one of these or all three of these, anxiety, depression, ADHD, ADD, it can make it really, really difficult to maintain a clean space for both yourself as well as your pets. Housekeeping under today's circumstances and set of life challenges can be very hard in and of itself. So breaking it down just a little bit, starting with depression. Everyday tasks can feel like they are just monumental. They can feel enormous to the point you can't even take them on. The brain experiences fatigue. It experiences reduced energy and feelings of hopelessness. And that makes these monumental, huge tasks hard to even start, let alone finish, right? So you've got that going on. And then if you've got any level of anxiety or even occasional anxiety, any kind of anxiety, some people might be so overwhelmed by the thought of cleaning or even organizing that they avoid it altogether because they just want to avoid anything that triggers them into anxiety. Sometimes just stress can trigger it. Housekeeping and a messy, cluttered house can be stressful. You shut down, you go find something else to do, you ignore it, and then more clutter kind of starts accumulating, right? It builds up. People with attention deficit stuff going on, or brain fog, or if you've got memory stuff going on due to any reasons. And that could be a side effect of a medication, it could be age, it could be stress, it could be lack of sleep. You have any kind of thing with your attention going on, it affects the executive function part of the brain that's responsible for your planning, organizing, and completing tasks. So it's not all that uncommon to start cleaning. You get distracted, you lose track of your goal, clutter starts accumulating here again, and things just spiral out of control. So whether you have one of these, or all of these, or a couple of these things going on, boy, I am telling you, if you're not someone that leans into organization to help you, and most people don't, like most of us just don't do that, things really do just blow up. And your house doesn't really necessarily need to be gross. It's just that clutter piles up. And then clutter in and of itself seems to amplify the conditions. It actually causes its own level of stress. So it can make these things kind of amplify in and of themselves. It's crazy. It's really crazy. I've experienced it. I'm sure some of you can relate to this. So then, I don't know about you guys, but one reason I got birds is because I was struggling with some depression at the time. I was struggling with some light anxiety at the time. It was just starting to kick in about the time I got Zoltan. And I really wanted a really happy, little, cheerful creature that I could interact with, that would give me something to focus with, have fun with. It would sing. I love the way budgies sound. And that's kind of one small reason. It wasn't the main reason, but I thought it would just kind of help me, And it does. It does my heart so much good to have these birds with me, interact with them, play with them, talk to them, see them be silly all the time, everything that comes with it. It is so rewarding to me. I did my research, though. I knew that birds could be very, very messy, but I'm sure a lot of people, you succumb to the cuteness of these little creatures, especially budgies. Oh my gosh, who doesn't love a budgie? Look at these guys. They're chasing each other around and eating birdseed and chattering and singing and having a blast up there. And how do you not be happy with something like that going on? But if you have some of these conditions going on, or you're experiencing something, health issues, energy issues, adrenal fatigue, anything that can kind of lean into some of these things, it makes cleaning up after a little animal like this all the harder. So if you've thought in terms of, oh, well, I shouldn't have just one cockatiel, I shouldn't have just one budgie, so you end up with 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever, they throw food everywhere. The little tiny hulls off of seed goes everywhere. If they're chowing down on something and it gets stuck to their beak, they shake their head and it goes flying over and hits the wall, it gets on the floor, it does everything, right? And then I've talked about the dander, the dust, that gets in the air, it settles down on your furniture. If you live in a dusty atmosphere anyway, a state, like I live in a desert type region, so it's dusty here as it is, it makes dust accumulate twice as fast. Oh my gosh. Little tiny downy feathers get in the air, they float, they land on things, you get feathers everywhere. Holy cow. You have to stay on top of this, and you have to be very diligent and be planning this into your day. For some reason, I think it's very easy to get in a mindset, and I don't know how this ever started, but a weekly I clean my bird's cage once a week, every week, once a week. And I think that goes back decades, and it's just carried along with humanity on caring. You have weekly tasks on cleaning or something after an animal. And with birds, the YouTube channel Love of Pets, and I've mentioned that on this podcast before, the host's name is Donna. She just put out a video this past week on cleaning your... There goes Zoltan. On cleaning your bird's cage and how often you should clean your bird's cage. She talked about different substrates to use in the bottom of the cage, and she advised, depending on how many birds you have in a cage and how long they're in the cage, once a day minimum. Some of them twice a day. She's got 30 birds in, I think she said, between 24 or 27 cages. She cleans those cages daily. Once a day, she's changing the paper in the bottom of them. Now, I have mentioned that they can accumulate mites, they can accumulate pests, all sorts of stuff. And another thing they can accumulate that will also attract pests is, like, for example, I gave Murray some broccoli today, and I clipped it inside of his cage, and he destroys it. He eats some of it, but he loves just tearing it to shreds. And about, I'd say 90% of it goes on the floor of his cage. When you have moist food like that, you can get mold buildup. That's going to attract a different type of pests. Oh my gosh, you just don't want to go there. Keep everything clean. And then they have a much more sensitive respiratory system than us, and we're keeping these wild little animals that are meant to fly free all the time. They're not supposed to be in an enclosed house structure like we've got them in, and we keep them in our homes. So they aren't meant to be in an enclosed space where all this dust can build up and get into their respiratory systems, and it can cause them problems. So you need to have a good air filter, a good vacuum, and some really good microfiber cloths, or I use the Swiffer dusters, that sort of thing, to make sure that you're always staying on top of the dust situation. Let's go back to this. You've got the potential of 50% of the population today with some level of mental unwellness, or, maybe they're struggling with some of these problems in some way or another, whether it's temporary or a condition that they deal with or whatever. And you have some of these little side effects from these situations creep up on you with your housekeeping. It affects that part of our brain. So if you think in terms of the undiagnosed people with any kind of mental unwellness, and let's just say that reaches up into the 75 or 80% range, oh my gosh, if you've got a good percentage of that group with a severe or a moderate to severe level of mental unwellness, you're going to see some very pronounced problems going on in their environments, in their house, stuff like that. Things will get just too overwhelming. Something's got to give. And then after a while, you get desensitized to your own messiness. Well, that's not so bad, I can let that go. Well, that's not so bad, I can let that go. And you get lazy because you have your mind on all these other problems that you're trying to balance, right? And things get away. Then if you have birds that are accumulating because they're breeding and you don't know how to stop this, or you didn't know better, or whatever, a lot of people do this. Things can get out of control. And then back to the bird hoarding. So if you've got some of this depression going on, a new bird is always like a new little jolt of happiness, right? And there's an addiction factor to new little baby birds and getting yourself a new bird for your flock. And then you don't think, oh my gosh, it's going to create its own amount of dust. It's going to create its own amount of noise. It's going to create its own amount of demand on my attention throughout the day. And pretty soon, some of this just gets away from you. If you don't have the time or ability to work with some of these birds, you get some behavior problems. Some of these behavior problem birds end up spending more time than they should inside their cages. The filth accumulates more. You see where I'm going. Vicious cycle, downward spiral, gets out of control. Oh my gosh. So, here again, this is very common in our day and age to be experiencing some of these struggles, right? In some capacity. We have to do self-care. So when it comes to our animals, make sure, for their sake and for your own sake, and for their well-being and your own well-being, only take on what is really, truly logical for you to take on. Make sure that the stress that you take on of attention, cleaning, feeding, expenses, training, everything that goes in with the birds, cleaning the walls, deep cleaning your carpets every few months, however often it needs to be done. Make sure it's manageable and make sure that you also have time for self-care. Now, I've never let my house get away from me in horrible, filthy levels of grossness. I know how it could. It would be very easy. It's really easy to let things pile up, right? And then you get overwhelmed. Again, it's very easy. But in recent months, in the past, well, just in 2024 in particular, I have been purging a lot from my space. I am 56 years old. I've got 56 years worth of accumulated gifts, clothing that you purchase over time. Trends change, stuff accumulates that you're not wearing anymore. Things that you bring home, mail stacks up, whatever life stuff, projects you're working on, books you're reading. And oh my gosh, I have made a point to clean my space, get organized, find a spot for everything, and determine what I really need and what I don't need. And we're also bombarded everywhere we turn with, you have to purchase this gadget thing or whatever it may be that accumulates. And just stuff in our space can get to be very, 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 very stressful. And what I have found actually helps me when I do feel like any of these three things are starting to creep up on me for whatever reason, like maybe anxiety because I've had too much stress through work or something, or maybe life starts getting the best of you and you start getting the blues for a little while, or finances get the best of you and you're kind of down in the dumps for a while. Or you do have maybe an imbalance or a chemical thing or a hormonal imbalance that causes some depression issues. It helps this too. It helps with any kind of focus issues. I spend a certain amount of time every day doing a certain amount of cleaning, and I find what works for me. But once I finally got everything organized, things donated that I needed to donate, space freed up, oh my gosh, not only is it easier to maintain, it looks doable, and it helps back off on some of the symptoms that I was actually experiencing with anxiety triggers, stress triggers, feeling overwhelmed, feeling hopeless. Everything started seeming possible. And then that in itself freed up more time to spend with my birds and my dog and my hobbies. Oh my gosh, it got better. So it is a form of self-care. And sometimes you have to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps because nobody's going to do it for you. And I guarantee you, tidy up. Spend 15 minutes at the end of the day cleaning up after your birds and cleaning their cages, cleaning the area, whatever it takes, okay? Take a few minutes, figure that out, work it into your day, and then your personal space too. Figure out a point in the day that you can do a little tidying, go through the house, have days of the week that you do certain chores, whatever works, and pretty soon you're going to find things are turning around for you. But also, when it comes to our birds, you're not going to risk that gross accumulation of filth that's going to contribute to the ill health, that's going to contribute to your respiratory problems It contributes to the stress that your body is under physically, and you're just going to feel better. So make sure that you are in a regimen, that you are aware of your surroundings. You're not getting too desensitized to things just out of survival mode, right? And here again, this can affect everyone at different points in our lives for different reasons. And there's a lot of value in staying on top of stuff. When it comes to our pets, I gave you a lot of reasons last week. It can affect their health. It can affect their respiratory health. It absolutely affects their mentality, being in a dirty surrounding, not getting enough attention, any of that. It's not good for them. If they are a forager type species of bird, they might be on the floor of their cage walking around and picking up food that fell that's mixed up with bird poop and stuff. You don't want them ingesting that. You don't want to get lazy on their eating surfaces, their food dish, their water dish, all of that, their perches, places where their feet are all day long, and that can work into their skin. You don't want them to get infections. Oh my gosh. And they are such amazing creatures. You don't want to get yourself to a point where your bird is just locked in its cage all day, every day. These are flying creatures. These are creatures that are social. They shouldn't be locked in their cage all day. It affects their mental well-being also. And then if that starts happening, they're going to start acting out. You're going to have behavior problems, and that's going to add to your problems. So really think things through before you buy each bird that you buy, and really think things through when it comes to things like their cleanliness, the general husbandry, the general care, the costs involved, the food involved, everything. And different species are messier than others. But really, I think the whole takeaway from this is that we are all under such tremendous amounts of stress, health issues, and it affects us in different ways. If you're having an issue with any of these 3 areas affect areas of cleanliness, and you have to be very, 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 very careful. Say, you know what, this is a very deep subject, and I know it touches a lot of us in different ways and on different levels. So thanks for sticking around with me this week and talking about hard things. But if this has been helpful or thought-provoking or inspirational on some level, you find value in the information or in the podcast in general, consider joining my Patreon. I'm going to put the link down in the show notes. Or if you'd like to just do a one-time contribution, you can always find me on Buy Me a Coffee. And I think that's all I've got this week. It looks like I kind of went a little bit long, and Zoltan is down on the floor hanging out with the giant dog right now. So I gotta go find where Bug went. I think he's on the other side of the room too. Alright everyone, have a great time. Go love up on your birds. Go hang out with your birds. Go have fun with your birds. And I will catch you next week. Bye bye.